Hi, I'm James Brookes, and welcome to From the Factory Floor, a conversational podcast about all things startup and tech, brought to you by the folks at thestartupfactory.tech. Welcome to episode 14 of From the Factory Floor. Somehow we're still going this long, but for this one, with a bit of a change of pace. So initially, we're joined by a brand new person to the podcast. So hello, Austin.
Hello.
So Austin, just give us a very brief intro to yourself. Who are you? Why are you here? Why have I invited you onto the podcast?
I've recently joined TSF. I've been working for TSF for about a month now.
Has it been that long?
Yeah, it's gone fast, hasn't it?
That's gone fast when time flies when you're having fun.
Yeah. And I used to be a teacher before I transitioned into a new career into tech.
And that's why he's here. Because so today's episode is, like I said, it's a bit of a change of pace. So rather than talk about anything specific to tech or to startups, we're actually talking about why someone wants to move into tech from a previous non-tech background. So the reason Austin's here is obviously, like you said, he previously was a teacher. And the reason I'm here I'm here every week, they won't let me leave, is that I actually, prior to being in tech, I worked in a completely different industry in electrical wholesale. So Austin, very briefly then, so what was it you did before? I know we very briefly said you were a teacher.
Yeah, I was a teacher. I taught mainly science and some maths, specialised in chemistry, and I taught for about 10 years, so quite a long time.
It's a decent stint in teaching. I mean, I don't think I could ever deal with kids for that long. Obviously, in future, if I ever do have kids and listen to this, I'm very sorry. But, I mean, so what was it really that made you think, do you know what, tech might be the thing for me?
Well, really, I've always enjoyed learning new things and problem solving, and you can do so much of that with tech. There's always new things to learn, new ways that you can apply technology to make new things to help solve problems and to make people's lives better. And that's what I really enjoyed. And I started doing some coding while I was teaching, and I started to enjoy that much more than the actual teaching side of it. And I thought it's about time to have a career change.
So you decided you didn't want to be an IT teacher.
No, absolutely not.
Full time. So I think for me, I mean, what's quite interesting about this, obviously, you've gone into the tech side of tech without sounding stupid, in what I'm saying. And I moved into almost the non-tech side with the project management. And prior to, so sort of a little bit of my history was prior to being at Cake Solutions, obviously where TSF spun out of, I was initially in electrical wholesale. So I worked in front of the counter, I drove delivery vans, I was in sales, I did some buying, I had a really all-round experience. And for me, I just wasn't really enjoying what I was doing. And then I sort of looked into some career options. And I mean, was there anything that put you off about going into tech? I know there's a bit of stuff that I was a little bit intimidated by.
Yeah, I guess it was hard to know how to get into it, really. Initially, when I'd done a little bit of tinkering around with things myself, it was quite difficult in terms of to know what to learn, how to get started, because there's just so much to learn. The amount of information and what you could be learning is vast. So I think that's a really difficult part getting started. I
mean, I think that's probably the reason I never went into the tech side, because I think, you'd go on something like, I remember back in the day, I think there was a site called Code Academy. I remember looking at something and just going, I don't even know where to start. There was, 10, a course on 10 different languages. I think I tried an initial Java course and got stuck for half an hour on something because I couldn't find the semicolon that I'd missed. And obviously as a newbie, I couldn't, and then I said, I can't do this. I mean, obviously if I put a bit more effort in, a bit more to it, but obviously I found the project management side of tech and I really enjoyed that. I mean, what was it exactly you did to actually get into tech? Because I know you didn't just do stuff on your own, did you?
No, absolutely not. So I was doing a little bit on my own. I thought the quickest way of getting into tech would be to do a coding boot camp. I thought I could learn all the stuff myself and probably struggle for a couple of years trying to self-teach myself everything, or I could go and do the same amounts, but in a couple of months with a coding boot camp. So I looked into various coding boot camps. I found North Coders, which are probably one of the best coding boot camps in the country. It was quite hard to get into in terms of you had to learn some the basics of JavaScript yourself, do a tech test before you get accepted onto the course. And then once you're onto the course, it's 4 months of just learning something new every single day. But that was fantastic.
Yeah, because it was quite interesting because North Coders are actually, so for those who don't know, TSF moved offices just before the pandemic, which is great, from Federation House, which we used to be based, over to Manchester Tech Centre. And it's quite funny because as we moved, so did North Coders, and they moved from the same building we were in to the same building we're in now. So it's quite interesting that, you know, we've almost followed each other. And so we've been involved with North Code in terms of watching their demos and obviously speaking to, you know, hiring people like yourself to then be full-time developers. So how did you find the actual course itself? You know, as someone who's, you know, a teacher, you know, obviously you must be used to learning and curriculum, all that sort of stuff that teachers have to deal with. How did you actually find going from that school environment to sort of the dev environment?
Yeah, it was tricky. It was, so every day is really intense. Like teaching is intense, but it's a different type of intensity. And so we start every morning at 8:30. You've got some challenges to do. Then there'll be some lectures that'll be for 2 or 3 hours. So that's quite challenging, just to focus for that length of time and make notes. And of course you can ask questions, but all that would happen in the morning. And then there'd be some tasks to do for the rest of the morning or into the afternoon. We'd be trying to apply what you'd learned or what had been delivered in the lectures to try to apply that, really. And it was really good, but it was really intense. So doing that from Monday to Friday for 14 weeks, that was, it was a lot.
Yeah, I mean, so whenever I look at code, I kind of, I mean, slowly, and it's one thing, you know, one piece of advice I'll give to people is, you know, slowly by osmosis, I can kind of read something and vaguely, and I mean vaguely, kind of understand the flow of it. But obviously doing that from, you know, a novice standpoint through to this is going to be to a professional standpoint, that must be quite taxing in terms of like just the mental load to learn everything that some people have done, A-levels, degrees, and then internships, you know, like we do at TSF. As much as obviously we don't have an intern at the moment, but
yeah, definitely was. And I think it's really good with North Coders as well, because they follow some industry standards. So for instance, they get you doing peer programming right from the beginning, which a lot of companies do. And that's fantastic, but as well, that's really intense as well. And so that made it, quite difficult in one way. But then it was really nice because actually it took something like coding, which could be quite a solitary thing, made it quite a little bit more social, where you had somebody to talk to and to bounce ideas off. And that was really good.
And how did you actually find it when you got into, because I know one of the things North Coast do is obviously do a project and a presentation at the end. Obviously, I've seen some of them. Yeah, how did you actually find it when, obviously from a teaching standpoint, where it must be great when you get, you know, the kids, you know, do their exams and they get good results. Obviously, it's a very different thing in coding where you actually build something, you look at it and go, actually, I put this together. How did that feel actually when you saw the first time you'd actually built something and it worked? Assuming it worked.
Yeah, absolutely. It was, that's the bit of that I really love about coding, when it all comes together, when you've solved the problems and kind of you forget about all the times that you've been pulling your hair out with things that won't work.
Like that semicolon.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, when you spent 2 hours trying to debug it and it's just, you know, a missing semicolon or something like that. It all comes together, and that's really good. And I felt that really with the first project I did with North Coders, where there was really 2 small projects and then the main project at the end that you do as part of the course. And for the first course, it was, or the first part of the project was creating an API for a Reddit style news app. And when that was working, and it all was, you know, when it passed all the tests, when it was assessed, it was fantastic.
I mean, obviously, I work as obviously part of my role is that I do a lot of the testing, not dev testing, but actually end to end. And it's often astounds me. So when I actually get hold of something that I know the guys have been working hard on, and the occasional late night and the amount of coffee that they have to go through to produce something, and you actually go, we built, you look at something and go, we've actually managed to build this in such a short space of time. I mean, how did you find sort of the difficulty to move into, well, in terms of people to look at it? I mean, I know I've got my bugbears in tech, and I'll go through those in a bit, but what do you think was the biggest hurdle that you had to go over sort of moving into tech?
I guess it was really just knowing or making a decision about what to learn and what path to take, really. Because there's so many things you could do, so many different languages. Dabbled a little bit in Python before. And so it was really tricky to know whether to go down that route or to go down a more traditional web development one, or to do the JavaScript, which I eventually did with North Coders. I think that's really difficult, actually, when you're just looking at getting into tech.
And then, obviously, so we've always focused really on the back end of systems, like sort of obviously server side, while, you know, we can build the front ends and we do very functional front ends. It's not been our forte at TSF necessarily. You know, we make it functional, and then someone else can make it very pretty. You know, people say the same thing about me. You know, still wait for the pretty bit. What made you choose, obviously, when you joined TSF, thinking around sort of how we are? Have you always had a leaning towards sort of the back end server side rather than necessarily the front end, or have you always wanted to sort of have the whole picture?
Yeah, I really wanted a full stack position where you're doing back end and front end. I've naturally always kind of liked the back end side of development more. It's a little bit more, I guess, you know, computational maybe. And I'm not, and while I can use CSS and some of the other techniques to make things look nice, that's a real skill in itself when people can specialize in that. And I can make something that looks, you know, pretty decent and functional.
That's the way we do it. We're fully functional. I mean, that's still in there, the old Kate t-shirts. Not that you know about those. I used to have the t-shirts that are fully functional on them, which, you know, again, some of the people that I know used to question why I was wearing it. But I mean, so one of the things I always wanted to ask someone, obviously, you know, a lot of the guys here have always been in tech and, you know, not had a career, or, you know, everyone's probably had part-time jobs outside of it. But what advice would you give to someone who was thinking, do you know what, I'm thinking about a career change, I'm not happy in what I'm doing, whether that be teaching or recruitment or project management, for example, and thinking, do you know what, tech looks cool, I like using, you know, I look at my phone, I look at the apps, I see all the cool stuff that gets built day to day, or, you know, even people going, do you know what, I've got an idea for an app, I can build that and make a fortune. You know, Flappy Bird did all right in the end. What advice would you give to someone who may be in the position you were when you were teaching and thinking about moving into tech?
Yeah, so I'd say really just start simply, I guess. So choose a technology, and I'd probably advise just start with some like HTML and CSS, because that's relatively easy to get started with. You just need a browser to get started with, or there's some online tools that you can get started with. It's very easy to start coding straight away. Learn the basics and then move up from there, really. Go from HTML, CSS, a bit of JavaScript, and see how you get on with that. Because it can be really tempting to get swayed by all the nice new technologies that you see. If you look on Twitter or elsewhere, and there's React and Angular and all these other wonderful things.
Don't start with AI, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Don't start with machine learning, definitely.
Yeah, you've seen, you know, everyone, obviously one of the big things is AI at the moment, and you know, blockchain was a couple of years ago. You know, it's still very prevalent. Yeah, don't start with those. You know, so when you actually started looking, did you look at, like, you know, job boards and see, you know, there's a lot of positions for JavaScript, or there's a lot of positions for .NET, for example? Did you just go, you know, I'm going to pick a technology that I enjoy writing things in, or how did you approach that? Yeah,
so I did look at some job boards and see what they wanted. You've got to take what they say with a pinch of salt, because often, particularly for a junior position, they list a load of things that really is a mid or even a senior developer position. So you've got to pick out what crops up in different adverts again and again. And JavaScript was one of those, Node was one of those. Python's also one that comes up a lot. And then really just get started. And I started with, you can start with free with the free CodeCamp website. It's fantastic. You can just go on there.
That's what I did with CodeCamp.
Yeah, and it's really good. And that gives you a really good grounding. And then by the end of that, you know if you enjoy it or not. And then you can take it from there.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, far more from my perspective, necessarily actually moving into the tech side and moving into the non-tech side of tech. I was trying to think of before we recorded this, I was still trying to think of a better way of saying that, and not been able to come out with it. Answers on a postcard for anyone who does. If you want to look into the world of tech, and you're not necessarily that as logically minded, or not necessarily sort of code inclined, moving into something like the project management side, like I did, has been incredibly rewarding for what I've done. I mean, eventually you do absorb a little bit of tech through osmosis. I mean, when you're around it every day, there's different parts. Eventually you can move into being more of a technical project manager and always developing that side, so you can both understand the processes and maybe that's probably the agile way of doing things with Scrum and Kanban, client expectations, and then adding the technical side is some of the best people I've worked with. And a lot of the people at TSF have that ability where they are very technical, they can create code, but they also understand the process. They understand, how to approach clients, when clients ask them questions, that there is both a business side and a technical side. And it's quite interesting when you see people who've got that skill set, and obviously, salaries and that sort of thing, then obviously skyrocket, because they're the sort of people who are quite rare, because, I'm saying, one of the things I would always say about tech is don't get put off by the stereotypical view of what a developer is. They're not this sort of Gollum-esque character locked in a basement. The IT, don't think Richard Adewardi in the IT crowd. People are, very normal people work in it and do really well in it. You don't have to be, like I say, locked in a basement looking very pale. Some people might be, but
but yeah, absolutely. I'd say that's really important. If someone starts to look into tech and to learn a bit, and if they thought, actually, it's not for me once I've done it, that's not a bad thing, because that technical literacy is really important. And there's not that many people out there that can do something else and talk about the tech and know what different things are as well. So that's hugely important for anybody that maybe tries it and thinks it's not for me.
Yeah, like I said, there's so much jargon, like, we mentioned Java, Python, .NET.
Mm-hmm.
It can be really off-putting, because you're just looking and go, I've got no idea where to start, like you said. And, when I looked and I just picked I literally might as well have had a spinner, and whichever one it landed on, I started having a look at. And, being a dev wasn't for me, but I really enjoyed seeing the creation, seeing the ideation, which is why both I started as a project manager and then moved far more into the startup world, rather than necessarily, staying at, Cape was great, and the founding I got there and the people I got to work with were brilliant in terms of both the devs and the PMO that they had set up. But I really enjoyed the startup world and how that changes. Did you ever notice any difference between sort of when you were sort of potentially applying for a place like startup, I'm sure it was really startup focused versus far more established sort of development teams? Was there any difference, or what made you sort of swayed you across the TSF side of the fence?
Yeah, I think I've always really enjoyed working in smaller organisations. And schools are pretty much just smaller organisations, because you can make a difference in those. In a big organisation, you can kind of get swallowed up by it and not necessarily be noticed or feel like you're making a big contribution. And when I looked at jobs in bigger organisations, are often having 3-month induction processes and learning how to do things. And then you'd be...
Oh, we had you on a project day one.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It was definitely in at the deep end.
I was going to say, if you didn't bring your armbands, you might not so need them. But no, I think it's always, it's one of the things we've had when we've had interns. And, obviously, unfortunately, the situation in the world, we've not been able to have them this year, or not been able to organise that. But the grounding that we've given them by giving them real live projects, and sort of the pride when one of our interns popped back in the other day just to say hello and was asking about what we'd worked on. I said, no, it's been used by real clients, it's a real thing. Whereas I spoke to some people who did internships or had interns, and they literally said, the classic, I was making coffee for 3 months, or I worked on this one thing, did a presentation, and it was never used again, or wasn't even looked at again. So again, it's obviously a very different thing, and I'm sure there's, a lot of corporates or bigger companies that you go to, bigger dev teams, will be able to support, and bring people on because they have that infrastructure and that formality. And it's, I think, how much it's just personal preference.
Yeah, I think it is just personal preference, really. If you don't mind taking the initiative and trying to work things out for yourself, then I think a startup, a small organisation is just fantastic, because you can get exposed to so many different parts of the business and you won't be siloed in one area.
Yeah. Well, I say, obviously, you've just started with us, and without just, saying we're brilliant, there are other options available in terms of corporates or startups or, those medium-sized businesses that have dev teams, and, they will support a younger or a newer developer as they go through the thing, or equally, a younger, less experienced project manager who's trying to find the feet. There will be places that will do that. So, I've just realised what time we're on. We've got absolutely rocketed through. So, I think the way that we always end this, Austin, this is your first one, and you've done very well, much better than I did on the first one, obviously, way back 13 episodes ago, so what would your one takeaway for people be, someone who's in teaching or who's in whichever industry is thinking about tech? What would your one piece of advice be to that person? So I'll say, just go for it.
Yeah, so I'd say just give it a go and start with something. Don't necessarily debate too much about what you're going to get started with. Again, just try something basic like some HTML, a bit of CSS, get your feet wet, get involved with it, see if you enjoy it. You'll pretty much know quickly if you enjoy it or not. And if you do, you can then learn a bit of JavaScript. You can do some really interesting things that look fantastic on the browser. And then you can go from there, really, and just, start simply and give it a go.
I think I'd really echo that. And I'd just add in that don't be put off by stereotypes or the jargon to some extent, because I know that can be, we mentioned APIs, and, it took me about 6 months to remember what API actually stood for. So there's a lot of jargon, and obviously there's stereotypes around tech, and believe me, it's not true. I've been to loads of meetups, conferences, it's great people, really supportive, incredibly helpful, and just give it a go. Don't let some of the things that you see about tech or something that might look complex put you off, because usually it's not that complex. So I think that's about us. So our next episode, well, I'm actually recording 2 in a week, which is interesting. It's almost going back to what we were discussing previously, which is all about startup accounting. So we'll have another new face. So, we do get everyone involved, Austin. It's not just picking you out of the crowd. Where Elliot, who helps us with our accounting, and Ian will be making a welcome return and covering that. So, thank you very much for your time today, Austin.
That's great. Thank you.
Cheers. Right. Thanks, guys. And I shall see you on the next one.
I think that just about wraps things up here. If you have any thoughts or questions on anything we've said today, get in touch, whether that be through our Twitter @RealTSF or email at hello@startupfactory.tech, or feel free to drop in for a coffee and a chat. As ever, thanks for listening.